to Sandy and Nora's podcast.
Hey, Nora.
Hey, Sandy.
How are you doing? We're getting more and more into spring. Are you enjoying the spring weather?
Oh, well, of course we had a blizzard this morning in Quebec City, but I have to say,
yeah,
it's awesome. Yeah, it's sweet. We've now had more snow in 2 weeks of March than all of February. So, that's nice. But no, I had like an experience tonight that, you just can't say that you're a feminist in Canada, I don't think, unless you've done St. Patrick's Day with Judy Rebick in a pub.
Hey, okay.
I don't think
All
she listens to the
right.
pod, but just had an amazing night. And I'm not going to talk about what we talked about because we just hung out, but it is just so awesome to have the experience to sit with someone with the experiences and the knowledge and the stories that Judy has. And we're still doing activism together, which is great. But it's just oh my God, this is so awesome.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Yay. I love that for you.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm great. I can't complain. I've just been really holed up on the editing process for my book. And Nora, it sucks. You know what really sucks is you write a book, which takes a long time. And then you reread that book before you submit it because you want it to be pretty good. And then you get it back and you have to reread it again with somebody else being like, I don't know about this word. And you're like, it's not the most fun thing, but I'm grateful for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm grateful. I quite, as you know, love reading other people's edits because I like sounding smarter, it's good. But it's just the process, as an activity. I could think of many other things I would rather be doing than reading my words over again.
Yeah. It sucks. It's so tedious. And then you're like, wow, if I'm bored by this, everyone's going to be bored by this. And then you just get into a cycle of doubt and it sucks.
Yeah. It sucks. But here we are. That's what needs to happen. And it just means I'm getting closer to the end. End.
Yes.
Can't wait to share this with all of you. But Nora, guess what?
What's that?
We're going to be in Edmonton.
I know. Oh my God. I'm so excited.
We're going to be in Edmonton. Yeah, me too. Alberta, we are coming. We're coming through. It is going to be on April 20th that you will be able to see us, me and Nora, in your city live. And we're really excited about it. We can't wait to share some space with you.
That's right. And folks, it is an afternoon show. I believe it starts at 3:00, though that's off the top of my head. Tickets will be on sale as of this show. We'll have tickets set up and you'll be able to get your tickets. And, because it's an afternoon show, we're going to have a nice reception after. And folks have asked if we're able to bring in John Camille Farah for this show. Unfortunately, his travel schedule and the venue and the cost is not going to make it happen this time. But we're going to look for some ways to see if we can do more shows with John all over Canada in the future. And for this one, you'll have to just settle with us, unfortunately.
It'll be good. We'll make it fun. We'll make sure that, we have more opportunities to be blessed with the musical stylings of John Camille Farah in future.
Yes, that is right. So today, Sandy, what are we talking about? Politics.
So much politics. I'm I'm, as you know, I grow weary. I grow frustrated. I am. I'm not growing. I am. I'm at the place where I just I am really frustrated with the way that politics is discussed. And what it leads to is this world where any small thing that we get, any small acknowledgement of anything happening, is something that we are told that we need to be grateful for, that we need to be very, very thankful of the powers that be. And, and I'm thinking of so many different things. One of the things I'm thinking of is this weird video that the Liberals put out this today, and we're recording this on Sunday, so they put it out on Sunday about housing and criticizing Poilievre on his housing track. But I'm also thinking a little bit about, by the time folks listen to this, about something that happened yesterday, maybe, which is the consideration of the NDP motion on what's happening in Palestine, on recognizing Palestine as a state. They may not get to it by Monday, from what I'm reading, but they might. So it may be the case that by the time you listen to this on Tuesday or later in the week, that this is old news. But I do think that it's worth us taking a look at this. It's a good thing. It's great that there's this motion that's going to be considered. But I want us to understand that there are multiple tools that people who are elected have at their fingers, and emotion is just one of them. And perhaps that's something that we should be grateful for and, see it as a win. Absolutely. I think public pressure very clearly led to this moment. But I don't think that that's the only place that they could have gone. And I want us to know that and discuss it.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad that you raised it. So let's just start with the fact that this was not supposed to be debated yesterday. Sandy, when was this supposed to be debated? Do you remember?
I think, when was it first? We talked about it on the podcast when it was first raised. It was a few weeks ago. I don't know exactly when it was supposed to be debated, but it's later.
Right. And it was postponed. Did you remember why?
I don't know why.
So it was postponed to respect the memory of Brian Mulroney.
The memory that was being shifted before our eyes to say he was the guy on in Canada on ending South African apartheid. That guy?
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to respect memory for someone who did something like that, I mean, I think onward, as soon as possible. Yeah, it doesn't
total sense,
doesn't compute.
Right? So this was supposed to come up a couple of weeks ago. And the NDP, and this was the message from March 1st from Heather McPherson, who's the critic for the NDP for Foreign Affairs or whatever. And she wrote, out of respect for the Right Honorable Brian Mulroney, and then but it's Right Honorable is all abbreviated, she just copy and pasted it from someone's website. The House of Commons will not sit today. The NDP opposition day and the vote on the horrific situation in Gaza will take place at the next sitting of the House during the week of March 18th. So, I mean, it's not exactly the NDP's fault, obviously, that they couldn't sit. That's politics. But it's just such an embodiment of what is so fucked up about the political system. Between March 1st and yesterday, hundreds more, possibly thousands more people have died in Gaza. And this was pushed by almost 2 weeks just because the fucking House of Commons didn't do its job to respect a dead guy. Are you kidding me? Yeah,
that just seems it's not computing in my brain. What you don't stop doing the work of running a country and whatever's happening internally in that country and what's happening in foreign affairs in that country because someone Brian Mulroney died. You don't do that. So I'm not really understanding. It was probably what I assume is that they were this is a convenient excuse that we can use to pass this off a little bit longer.
Yeah, and the Liberals are definitely playing this game because every delay is going to change the way that people are talking about this stuff. And really, every single delay is another set of deaths, is another set of bombings. The Al-Shifa hospital is being bombed right this minute as we record. Again. And every day that it gets worse and worse and worse, the Liberals, I think, are politically, strategically deciding that they can go a little bit further in their support for Gaza publicly. And so pushing it off is like win-win for everybody. The NDP had more time to prepare. They had more time to get people to call other MPs to make their voice heard. Certainly, there are MPs who are outside of the NDP and the bloc who are sympathetic to calls for a ceasefire. And so, I mean, it's on the crassest of politics. This is happening. And then what's happened in between these two periods of time, the foreign affairs minister went to Israel and she went to the West Bank. Mm-hmm. And we didn't hear very much about this trip.
Yeah. What'd she do there, Nora?
Well, she met with pretty much the architects of the genocide and shook hands with them and had pictures with them. And she was wearing, I saw someone talk about her outfit as being like the woman version of the Zelensky battle fatigues, which is probably accurate, actually. It's like this battle kind of dress with a giant belt. She met with Israel and was steadfastly with our friends in Israel. She announced $1 million to go to Israel to help find sexual assault on October 7th. Okay. And then a couple of days later, she goes to the West Bank and she basically does the exact same thing, but opposite, and including announcing $1 million for sexual assault support services in the West Bank. Now, there was a difference between the two announcements. The one that she announced in Israel was getting RCMP support. In the West Bank, it's just money. And then she had a third tweet that mirrored the two tweets about this funding for Israel and then the West Bank about the children, how Canada's supporting the children, which we're obviously not, because children are the biggest victims in this war, both the death count, but also the long-term lasting impacts in the lives of the children that survive. And so there's two parts to this that are really important, I think, for us to deconstruct. The first is what the fuck are the Liberals doing here? What are they trying to do by walking this tightrope that's just leaving everyone confused and angry? And then on the other side of the question is, where were journalists? So I'm going to throw that to you. What are the Liberals doing trying to play both sides in this genocide?
Well, I mean, they're doing what they always do, which is trying and failing to not take a position and then somehow win everybody's support. But instead, they're making everybody upset. And it's okay, look, the fact that we don't have a lot of reporting on this means that we are probably what we're going to hear is just exactly what the government has put out. And the government did put out a statement on March 10th about this. And here's what it says. It says that the Minister of Foreign Affairs met today with Israel's Minister of Foreign Affairs. That the Minister of Foreign Affairs reiterated Canada's long-standing position that Israel has the right to exist and defend itself. That Canada condemns Hamas. That Canada wants Hamas to immediately release all hostages. Then it says that the minister has deep concerns over the reports of sexual violence committed by Hamas and is underscoring Canada's strong support for investigations. Then it says that the minister has deep concern about the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza and is asking to allow for humanitarian aid to enter Gaza through all means possible, including land crossings. Then she says that she would like for Canadian citizens and permanent residents to be able to leave Gaza.
As if there's that many Canadian citizens in Gaza anymore. What Canadians are left in Gaza?
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, what does this say? What does this do? I'm curious about what the actual reason is for her going over there, because this doesn't do or change much. Allocating money to these investigations, read in context with this government being the government that is going to court to try to stop information coming out about residential schools in Canada, read in concert with that being how they've acted on colonial atrocities in the past. It's what are you doing? You're giving money for investigations that we already know at this point from the New York Times themselves, which was one of the major outlets that published all of the allegations on the rampant sexual assaults that still there doesn't seem to be there seems to be some like strangeness around that claim. Like, what are we doing as a country going over there and be like, here's some money for some more investigations? Like, what are we doing? what is this really about? And I don't know that we have an answer to that really, besides, like this sort of speaking out of both sides of their mouth. I mean, par for the course, I suppose.
Well, I think like let's really make this point quite clear. So the liberals have their nuts in a vice right now, and they don't know how to get their nuts out of the vice. It isn't as if this was happening even 20 years ago, we would be seeing the liberals supporting Israel to the extent that they are. But the way that the global powers have shifted, where it's all in for Western powers to defend Ukraine against Russian aggression. It's there's the same Western backed or Western based logic that it's all in for the West to protect Israel against its enemies, right? And this is the language that we're hearing all the time. I mean, it doesn't matter if the enemies are literally living under Israeli occupation and that their enemies are already subjugated and living in an apartheid state, and that Israel is basically shooting fish in a barrel and starving people to death and doing ethnic cleansing, that there's still a global order at play where Israel plays a very, very important role as an outpost of the United States, and Canada has to absolutely defend it. And so this is where the nuts get stuck into the vice, where it's like, okay, so they have to defend the global order. But Canadians, by and large, are not interested in this global order. Like, the global order is shit and it's rotten, and we know that. And liberals have a hard time walking this tightrope because they try to seem like they are average people who care about international law and justice and humanitarianism, which is different from the conservatives, who would probably say they don't really care so much about international stuff in general. And so the liberals, like, having a base of people who, on the balance of things, are going to support Palestinians, I don't know, probably fucking at least 6 times out of 10, and maybe even 7, I think probably more like 7 or 8 times out of 10. But knowing that they have this position in the world that they have to defend Israel makes these positions that they're taking completely incoherent. And they're not smart enough to dance around the incoherence. And so we literally get Melanie Joly putting out the exact same tweet, except replacing "I believe Israeli women" with "I believe Palestinian women." And it's like, did ChatGPT write this? Like, this is, who are you fooling right now? And it's all very bad because the liberals are going to lose everything over this gamble, the gamble of trying to walk the line and play both sides. And you can see it's a little bit different in Australia, where Australia seems to be a little bit more willing to break with that international Western consensus, a little bit. And the people that are going to rise in their place are the conservatives, which have an even worse position on Israel and won't deserve picking up the residual hatred left over from the liberals, but they're going to pick it up because that's where everyone, like, that's the only other place a lot of Canadians are going to park their votes. It's a mirror image of what's happening in the United States, with the exception that the two men are not fucking on their deathbeds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's also so like the speaking out of both sides of their mouth, like this, catching hate from everywhere. It's just like, oh my God, if they just like made a coherent decision, like on where they wanted to be, what their principles actually were, they could, instead of saying we support this and we support that and we strongly condemn this and we strongly condemn that, you could use the power that you have in the world to try to pressure. Like, you want Canadian citizens and permanent residents to come home. A strange thing to say. Like, hopefully you also care about people who need to make it out because they need to make it out, like you did with Ukraine, let's be clear. Like, you could use your political power to say, like, perhaps we don't support what's happening so that people can leave. You could like, you care about the worsening humanitarian crisis. You could demand that Israel makes humanitarian aid available, like, through the land and the air and the sea and wherever else. You can make those demands, but you're not going to, because you are also saying that you unequivocally support Israel. It's like it's not a tenable position to take. Like, and it's this politic where politicians just say the things that we're thinking. I mean, gosh, it's just so frustrating, and it's just one of the things that I'm thinking about too with this motion that is being discussed this week. It's like we should have an understanding of the powers that politicians have. Like they can, there's bills, they can make laws, they can, make clear policy decisions, policy positions moving forward. They can allocate money, resources, budgetary things. They can pull away money and resources from things too, and they can make. Like they can take positions that are more like ceremonial in some ways, and like a motion that's heading forward is kind of like, it's like the bare minimum of using the power, which is fine. Like I want to be clear, like that's a huge step and that should be seen as a victory. But I think we should just know what that is and know that, like, yes, this is going to be talked about as a very major flashpoint. And it is. I'm curious to know how you think that vote's going to go, Nora. But like, it's like the minimum, like there's more that can be done. Like, for fuck's sake, like the amount of money that's being allocated to supporting weapons of war in Israel, for example. Like we could, there could be like a real attempt to try to stop that. And, in a minority government situation, that power can be used.
Well, this is it, right? We've mentioned this on the podcast before, and I know a lot of Palestinian activists have gone after NDP MPs on this point. And it is very important for us to tease out what it means to say, okay, so the Liberals are propped up by the NDP, and they're being propped up on the promise of a completely inadequate dental care plan that is criticizable to the Hills, and a pharmacare plan that is a plan to make a plan, as we've explained already. Now, those are fine, but do they justify the blank check that the NDP has given to the Liberals? And I mean, Gaza notwithstanding, I would say no. I would say that this was a major coup. I think that's how you have to see it, as a coup from the Liberals to completely neuter any criticism from the left. Because the criticism that comes from the left now will always be, but you're in a coalition with them, even though it's not technically a coalition. But that's obviously what people are going to do. It hamstrung the NDP to the Liberals, and which in parts of Canada where the fuck Trudeau stuff was really, really strong, but where the NDP is actually competing more against the Conservatives than they are against the Liberals, like that's a political problem. And no, I don't think that, all of the military spending, all of the austerity, right? Like, we're not even talking about the fact that the Trudeau government is trying to pull $15 billion out of the public service right now. So things like $400 million being cut from Indigenous Services Canada and Crown Indigenous Relations, which local chiefs are being like, what the fuck? This is bad. And it's all being propped up by the NDP. So that's bad. Bring Gaza back into this, and then it's like, sorry, yeah, you can get a motion to call for a ceasefire. And I don't know how it's going to go, actually. I think that if it fails, it'll fail very, very slimly. And if it passes, it'll pass very slimly. Like, the Conservatives will vote against it. The Bloc will vote for it. The Greens and the NDP will vote for it. And it will come down to the Liberals and where Liberals are. And the Liberals are divided on it. So I am very, very curious to see how that's going to happen. But you're propping the government up. Break the sucking and blowing agreement and go back to a minority position and debate things out as a minority government. Like, for me, it just seems so obvious, and not necessarily that you'll win. I think that you have a better leverage point, though, of actually having an election threat rather than no threat at the fuck all. And I actually don't even think that the NDP would need to go to an election threat. I think that just having the negotiations on an issue by issue basis without having this agreement that forces them together anyway, regardless of what happens, that is where the disaster is. And I don't know. Like, I don't understand how NDP MPs are okay with this, frankly. Like, it's just such a disaster of a decision. And they've been living this disaster now for a couple of years, and they will live it for another fucking, 18 months. But like, that is what they should have done is, and we've said this like from the beginning, that it should have been, this agreement is over unless you instantly end all arms sales to Israel, which is finally starting to happen. And then also to take a really clear position and to do everything Canada can do to open these. I mean, fucking threaten the agreement over how many Palestinians can come to Canada. Threaten the agreement over fucking saying you want 10,000, not 1,000, or fucking 100,000, not 1,000. Fuck. Ukraine almost brought in 1 million people. I mean, promised people. It was only 200,000 have actually come, but God, like that's the issue. Now, then the question becomes, how do you put the pressure on? And that's the strategic question is, how do you put the pressure on, which is not the same conversation as that they have to put the pressure on it. But anyway. Yeah,
it's like, why have a minority government if you're not going to use that in a moment like this? And so, we've said that before. I don't think we need to beat it too much over the head, but it's like, yeah, well, I guess we'll see how it goes. I suspect that there will be an attempt to avoid taking any sort of vote on this. Like that's what I assume the Liberals will try to do, is prevent actually having to go to a vote on it. But we'll see. I guess we'll see. I think in the end, when push comes to shove, they will agree to the position in the motion, which is demanding an immediate ceasefire, suspending trade in military goods, reinstating funding for UNRWA, which has already happened. There's
and the military thing is done too.
Yeah, it's not hard for the Liberals to take this step, but it's like, again, we can go farther than this. In fact, we must, if we want to be able to if these people want to be able to look at themselves in the mirror,
Yeah. I mean, they don't, though. They don't care. These people, they don't care. I mean, because I don't know if you saw this, Sandy. I wrote a story this past week about how many people have actually come to Canada since the announcement of the program was made. And so.
And how many people is that?
How many do you think?
Oh, I don't know. I can't guess.
Of the 1,000. No. Of the 1,000. She doesn't mean a random number.
Please tell me 700 at least.
Jesus, what the fuck? That's so naive. No, of course there was zero.
I know,
it's
not naive, Nora.
It's zero.
I said, please tell me 700 at least. Okay.
No.
Does that sound like a naive person?
It's none. No one has been able to come. And what's so annoying about this is it's like Canada defaults to, well, it's a complicated situation on the ground. Well, it's very dangerous. It's very difficult. They've made barriers such that you cannot come from Gaza to Canada. You must stop in another country to complete your application. So that's already a problem. And it doesn't sound like they actually cleared this with Israel. And so, I mean, not that they have to clear it with Israel, not that Israel would say yes to this, but they haven't said anything that they've talked to this about with Israel. And that's kind of like the key player in this. And so if Israel's not being cooperative, then that puts a barrier already. And so of the people who have been approved, that's 12. Okay. 12 people have been approved. They've been able to get out of Gaza. They've passed the security clearances. They've given their biometric information. They have their passports. They're approved. They are on their own to get to Canada. And no one has come yet.
Oh my God.
What a fuck you from our country. The first planes that brought Ukrainian asylum seekers to Canada, or temporary residents, whatever you want to call them, was full of 900 people, and they came to Winnipeg 2.5 months after the program was announced. Now, the Ukrainian government was cooperating, and obviously the conditions in Ukraine were not even close to the conditions of what is happening in Gaza, so there would be more difficulty. But there are actually hundreds of people in Egypt who Canada could instantly bring if they expedited all of the rest of the application stuff. That there's no Israeli government stopping them. They're in Egypt, they're out of Gaza, and even they can't get evacuated from the Canadian government. It's a joke. It's a complete joke. And then I asked myself, and this is why I wrote the article, where have journalists been on this?
Well, Nora, I don't know if you know this, but Canada is just like a giant money laundering scheme, moonlighting as a country. And so if that's what you are, you don't need journalists.
Right.
Yeah. That's really, really, really awful. Like they're obviously we need this type of reporting so that we will know things like this. But unfortunately, where did you publish that? In the Maple?
That's at the Maple. At
Yeah.
the Maple. And actually, I mean, the Maple's an independent group, right? So it took a little while for it to get out. But between me getting that data and the report being published, the Canadian press scooped me. Motherfuckers.
Oh, well, that's good.
So-
Well, it's good that the Canadian press is reporting on it. But we need more.
I'm curious as to how we were in the exact same period of time at that one. So I would love for folks to tell me how that happened. But anyway, yeah, like the complete media inattention to Ahmed Hussein's trip to Rafah, of Melanie Jolie going to Israel and the West Bank. I mean, it's not really covering any of these issues until they're kind of like forced to or whatever. It's just like, you're not going to change Canadians' minds by hiding this stuff. Like, that's just not going to be how it is. And rather, you're actually putting the nail in the coffin of Canadian journalism in the way that this is being covered.
Mm-hmm. Now, Nora, another thing happened this week here in the United States that's going to probably have some impact in Canada too, and that is the TikTok, the attempt to like ban TikTok, of which I did see some news that the Liberal government did some sort of like a review of TikTok before the U.S. government had their debates this week on banning TikTok, which is not how they're talking about it. They're saying that, we're not trying to ban TikTok. We're just saying that they have to sell it to someone else to run in order to be accessible within the U.S. territories. Now, Nora, I want to talk about this just because I've been seeing, I mean, we've spoken about this briefly before, but I do think it's worth repeating. But I've been seeing quite a bit of critique talking about this as a huge blow to free speech. And if it is that, I think we have some things to be concerned about. But I wonder, is it a huge blow to free speech?
Is it a huge blow to free speech? That's such an interesting question. I mean, I actually have, I would say yes and no. Is that a fair thing to say? I mean, in the most basic sense, yes, it's an attack.
You sound like a liberal,
right? I'm going to pull a fucking Justin Trudeau on this and say it's an attack on free speech in that, yeah, it's a very popular platform that people are disseminating speech, and you're going to shut it down and you're going to impact people's speech. It is not an attack on free speech in that it's a fucking private company and they can do whatever the fuck they want, and the government can do what they want to private companies. And God, like, that's just the most boring argument. But yeah, okay, on the balance of things, I'm going to say it's an attack on free speech.
Yeah, I wish the government would do more to corporations.
Well, this is
to be honest. It's like, wow, look, they can do things to corporations. Very interesting. Yeah, I think on the balance, it's like not an attack on free speech, actually, on the balance. I think that, you're right. Like, it is like, it's a way that people get their thoughts out, but it's also a place where people get their thoughts manipulated. And I, like, again, as we've said before, like, if we believe that this is an important place for free speech, then we need a way to make sure that if this is where free speech is going, that it is managed publicly. And quite frankly, it's not right now. So it's never free. It's always speech that is going to be contingent upon what the mediator, which is TikTok itself or Twitter or Instagram, depending on who we're talking about that week, it's their prerogative what gets out there. And that's not free speech. Right.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, you totally convinced me. Now, I'm curious on your take on this. Like, what is really driving this? Because I know a lot of, like, the most popular narrative that I've seen is that it is radicalizing people to take the side of Gaza, and this is the impetus that is driving the United States government to shut it down. I'm not convinced by that.
Honestly, I don't think that I'm convinced by that in its entirety, but I think that that's part of it. I do think that there is, like, just listening to some of the members of Congress talk about it, it's like, for them, I think it's a very easy a way to continue culture wars that have zero impact on their base. And so whether that be talking about Gaza or China or, gosh, this is corrupting our kids and teaching them about this, that, or the other, which is how they're talking about it. It's a very easy way for them to continue culture wars. Like these politicians don't give a shit about TikTok. They don't care about how significant it is in terms of as a tool for pop culture, for society, for the way that people connect with one another. They don't care. But what they do care about is that this is a place where a lot of these culture wars are fought, where they're won, where they're mitigated, where we can see where the tide of like the zeitgeist is going. And what's it to them if they have one less to monitor? They don't care. But to be able to have this conversation is something that fuels energy, frustrations going into the election, for sure.
Well, and this is it. I think it's definitely a convenient excuse. So when I say I don't buy it as being the argument, I don't want to say that I don't think that it's a big part of it. But I think that, there is power to this platform, clearly. And the United States, I think, is realizing that it's losing control over culture. It's losing control over a lot of Hollywood and movie culture because there's just better movies being made in other countries. They're losing music supremacy of the world because there are pop acts from other countries that are just as big or even bigger in the United States or among segments of different Americans, certainly based on age. And TikTok is a giant driver of culture, of what is popular, of what people think. And so I think you're right to say the culture wars, like whether it is Israel or whether it is, seeing people say that people are becoming trans because of TikTok, like it doesn't matter, actually. You can say anything you want. But the real concern is that it's Chinese. And that the United States knows that China has in its possession an extremely powerful dissemination tool that the United States doesn't.
Okay, so just going back to this news on what Canada's positioning has been on this. So Minister François-Philippe Champagne announced that Canada is conducting a national security review of TikTok.
Sure, buddy.
Yeah, and then they
I bet
said,
he's watching all of the dances.
Right, and then they've said the review is under the Investment Canada Act. And that once that national security review is complete, they're going to inform Canadians what actions they will take with respect to this. What do you think about that, Nora?
It's so funny, eh? Like Canada's always treating things like security threats that should be treated differently. And I'm thinking of, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was this attention on early pandemic warning systems as being a question of national security and not a question of public health, of global public health. And media played a huge role in how they conceived of reformulating this as not being viruses and pandemics can happen anywhere, any part of the world, whether they're malicious, whether they're accidental, whether it's a fucking bug that was in the Arctic permafrost that's now been released into the atmosphere. It doesn't matter. That from a perspective of global health and global public health, we need to treat these issues as global public health issues, which means that you do things like, give people the money and the resources to live as healthy as possible together, right? Okay, that's the global health position. But instead, the push was to make it a national security issue. And so the fact that it was coming from China, the fact that China had our precious Michaels, that they're an enemy state, all of a sudden then dealing with the pandemic wasn't actually dealing with it in a public health perspective. It was dealing with it in a national security threat. And so to to look at TikTok from a national security threat and not from the hegemony of culture that is owned by a foreign country or an entity that Canada has zero control over is really, really telling, especially considering how many Canadian content creators are on TikTok making Canadian content, right? So it's like you have the ownership issue where Canada can't intervene with that at all. You have a regulation issue, which of course Canada can intervene with because TikTok is operating in Canada. And then you have the Canadian culture aspect of it with how many Canadians are making and consuming content on TikTok. Now, maybe considering all of those things together is too much for Champagne or for the Liberals or whatever, because it doesn't fit into the neatly China's our new enemy and we need to use like national security language around this stuff. But it just seems to me that they're setting it up to make sure that they are not going to deal with this in any way that is useful at all.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, right? Like you think about some of the things that have been discussed as national security threats in the last few years, like, you know, the convoy and so on. Are those audiences coming from TikTok? Are they maybe coming from like Twitter, 4chan? I don't know, Reddit? Like of all the places, TikTok? Like it's just really bizarre. It's like it's a narrative that doesn't make any sense until you realize that Canada just does whatever the US does. So and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. As to why this is happening. But it's just a very strange thing that again just makes really, really clear what we are lacking in this digital world in terms of how we connect with one another. Like, gosh, like Nora, do you think there's going to come a time where we discuss whether or not we do have to have a clearly identifiable digital identity online? Because I feel like at some point we're going to have that discussion, are we not? I feel like we're kind of late to it. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we're like decades too late to this conversation that's eventually going to have to happen. It seems clear to me, but I don't know. Like, instead we're like, okay, TikTok, national security threat.
Ban it.
People
Maybe
are
don't ban
doing
it.
dances online and following trad wives. Like, I don't know, man.
You know, it's Eddie. I'm writing this book in the next book on the corporate control of democracy in Canada and all this stuff. And there's some stuff that I'm discovering or rediscovering or reminded of that I just think is so interesting. And one of those things is the role that Canadian National Railway played in building modern communications infrastructure. So the CBC was formed through the Canadian National Railway. And, you know, for all of the racism and horrific colonialism that comes with the CNR, and I want to mention that because that's a really important part of this. There's also this whole like conversation about actually connecting Canadians from coast to coast. And as the CNR was, you know, uniting different train segments, because of course there were lots of different train segments, especially in Eastern Canada, that had existed before they all became under the banner of the CNR. They were putting up communications posts all across Canada to give Canada the opportunity and the capacity to have its own radio service. And while they were building that, like in the earliest days of the first national radio service, there was only 3 hours of radio available for Canadians in like 1928 or something. Then they have this big commission, a royal commission in 1929 on public ownership of telecommunications, because of course telecommunications, it's emerging in the United States. Canadians are now listening to radio from the United States, and the Canadian government is like, oh shit, we need to push back against this Americanization of our airwaves. And eventually what emerges is not just the CBC, but is also the understanding of the airways as being a public good. And that when you regulate the airways as a public good, there are ways for democratic processes to play into them about what radio station gets what channel, what should they play, how much Canadian content, all this kind of stuff that it feels somewhat anachronistic because we have like this globalized digital communications infrastructure. But that mentality that the airwaves are public in Canada, and they still are public. I mean, if you work on the radio at some point, if you've worked on the radio at some point in the last like 150 fucking fucking years, this country, your station identification at the first thing in the morning is you say, these are public airways. And if you've got a complaint about what you hear on these airwaves, you can call the Canadian Radio and Television Communication, Canadian Radio Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC. And so does that, Sandy, sound like anything we've done with the internet?
This is why, like, I continue to be confused about this. I'm like, what the fuck are we waiting for? Like, why are we not doing anything about this? It's obviously having a massive impact on like everything in the world. Like, I just don't understand what the powers that be are fucking waiting for. Like, oh my God, do something and stop like acknowledging that it's an issue and like do something, you know, please, somebody. Like, I just don't know. Yeah.
Well, it also goes really, really deep because like every time a politician's like, oh, polarization is so bad, it's like you don't have a national project anymore. You have nothing that builds Canada anymore. And so obviously there's going to be polarization if every one of us is receiving our news from 100 different sources that are from everywhere in the world. Like there's no common anything that is built in Canada, that is for Canadians, that is capturing Canadians, that is giving Canadians access to do their own media. Like, you know, like just look at our podcast. Our podcast runs on almost no money and we cannot live off of this. And people are like, oh my God, Sandy Nora, like, wouldn't it be great if you do this and do this? I would love to hire a journalist in Ottawa and have a Sandy Nora podcast journalist in Ottawa at part of the press gallery and asking questions to politicians. But we have absolutely no access to anything because it is all so motherfucking private in this country, and there's no interest whatsoever to build anything that actually allows Canadians to have a Canadian perspective on all of the fuckery that's going around. Because the only people that serves are average people, and the people that it does not serve are the people that are in power. That's everyone from Justin Trudeau to Pierre Poilievre to fucking Galen Weston to fucking, you know, Ted Rogers, who's dead, like whoever the fuck is at the head of Rogers right now, like whatever. So this is the core problem, and getting out of this core problem is the real, I don't know, the real pickle, the real giant question.
Yeah, and you know, we have to get people to talk about that too. So there we are. And again, this all brings us back to the fact that Canada is a money laundering operation, pretending to be a country. It's just like, it just like fuck. We desperately need to have these sorts of conversations. I don't, you know, it's true. Like Nora and I, like I think we're doing okay. You know, we have this great podcast. People are listening to it. We're doing fine. But you'd think that there would be an opportunity for growth there somewhere, but there isn't. Like it's really, really difficult to get any sort of funding or support in this country if you're doing anything that has to do with journalism or talking about the news or holding power to account. It becomes very, 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 very difficult. Or culture. And so
I'm just bitter. I just got my royalty check of $100 for two books.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are the issues that plague us as we're walking into, we're just about to head into an election season, you know, like, believe me, it's going to happen. And I mean, these are the types of things that we need people to be asking questions about and holding politicians' feet to the fire on, you know, like all of this stuff is related, like how we talk and where we talk about these issues is related to then how quickly we can get the government to move when a genocide is taking place in another part of the world that we are supporting. And so, you know, like this stuff is all, I mean, it might sound funny because it is. It's like this platform where people are doing a lot of dances and cooking food and whatever. It's like national security risk. Like that's sounds outrageous. But it's also like, it is really, really serious. Like how we connect, how we discuss, how we share information. The fact that like Reddit is the only place online that makes sense anymore is like, I don't understand how it happened. Because remember when it was the one place that didn't make any sense? Like, what's going on?